Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the Socratic Circle podcast. It is Monday, December the 30th, 2019. It is currently 3:14 p.m. Central Time. Now, I know some of you listening may be brand new to the Socratic Circle podcast. You may not even know what a Socratic Circle is. So let me take a few minutes to try to explain what this podcast is all about. All right, just be patient. Just give me a few minutes and we're going to get to the topic at hand today. And let me just tell you, it's an important topic and it's kind of depressing. All right, it's kind of shocking. You may be aware of what we're going to be talking about. Maybe you're not, but I think you're going to find it to be very informative and enlightening, or at least that is my goal. So let me explain. The Socratic Circle podcast, what am I trying to accomplish? The Socratic Circle podcast is a podcast designed to take some time to look at what's happening in our world from a philosophical perspective. It's a podcast designed to talk about philosophy, and we may talk about philosophy, and when we say philosophy, we may be talking about philosophical ideas found in music, in movies, in TV shows, in culture. We may just talk about philosophical concepts. We were doing a series on why you cannot trust yourself, and that does a lot with that's not only a philosophical perspective on human nature, but there's a lot of other elements there. I think the idea with the Socratic Circle podcast, if I'm just being honest with you, is this. I do a lot of different podcasts. I do the Theology Central podcast, where we take the time to look at what's happening in our world from a theological perspective. I have the VBC podcast. That's the podcast of Victory Baptist Church, where you hear the sermons that I preach and the Sunday school lessons that I teach from Victory Baptist Church. I do the non-Catholic podcast. That is a podcast designed to look at Catholicism, everything related to Catholicism, from Catholic news to Catholic theology, Catholic history. That's that podcast. We have a hermeneutics podcast that we're still trying to figure out what we're going to do, and that's designed to look at subjects related to the principles of biblical interpretation. So when you look at all of those are very specialized, right? Very specific ideas that I'm going to be dealing with. The Socratic Circle podcast is designed to give me a little bit more freedom, a little bit more leeway, where I don't feel so constrained that I have to deal with each subject from a very specific point of view. I can have a little bit more freedom, because if you don't know anything about me, I have a million interests, right? I mean, I have so many things I'm interested in. I cannot keep, I don't have enough time in a day to do all the things that I'm interested in and to consider the things that I'm interested in. There's just so much. We live in a world where so much is available to us, and I like to talk about the things that I'm interested in. So the Socratic Circle, it allows me some more freedom, and I do like to ask lots of questions. And that's the idea of a Socratic Circle. Asking questions, but I like to ask questions in order to lead people to see things from a different perspective, to lead people, ask questions to try to lead them to a moment of, a moment of revelation, where they finally realize something that maybe they did not notice before. So, if you look at all the things that we've covered in this podcast, we've talked a lot about a lot of different things, and we're still trying to figure out what the future is. I've got so many podcasts, and just trying to figure out what to do. So here's what I'll tell you. If you would like to keep up with all of our podcasts and our live broadcasts, we'll be doing a lot more live broadcasts coming up soon when we get an internet situation set up. Once we get that set up in place, we'll be doing a lot of live broadcasts. And if you want to be able to hear our live broadcasts and all the podcasts that we do, this is what you really need to do. You need to go to the Apple App Store. You need to go to the Google Play Store, Apple App or Google Play. Do a search for the Spreaker Podcast Radio. Spreaker is spelled Spreaker, Spreaker Podcast Radio. Once you have that app downloaded, do a search for VBC. That is us, Victory Baptist Church. Now, I sometimes when people listen to the Socratic Circle podcast, like, wait a minute, that's coming to us from a church. That's a church's podcast. Yes, it is. But again, it's designed to give me a little bit more freedom and leeway. So there's a reason why. I'm not going to go into the whole history and how it was designed, but that's okay. I'll throw this out there. Way, way, way back before no one knew what a blog was, I had a blog called the Worldview blog, where I looked at everything going on in our world. And then at one point, I had a podcast called the News in Focus podcast, where I really focused in on what's happening in our world more from just an information news perspective, sometimes looking at it from a theological perspective. But I like that to have a podcast where I have some freedom. And so that's why the Socratic Circle podcast was designed. And again, there's a lot more history there I'm not going to go into. So we have all of these podcasts. So if you go to the Spreaker Podcast Radio, you download the app, do a search for VBC. You're going to find us, Victory Baptist Church. Once you find us, then you can go to the little star under each podcast. Tap on the little star. That will make us a favorite. And then please, 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 I cannot beg you enough. Hit the follow button, all right? Hit that follow button. If you're using the Spreaker app and you're not following us, please, I plead with you, I beg of you, do so. We would like to get that number well above the 22. The 22 number is kind of embarrassing, really. But considering how many people were using our standalone church app, something clearly has not transitioned over. So if you could hit that. For those listening to us on YouTube, hey, thank you. Please subscribe there as well. And just wherever you're listening to us, again, the Spreaker app is the best way. You can listen to us when we're live on the air, and you can get notified when we upload new content. So please use that. All right. That kind of explains what we're trying to do. So here's what I have for you today. If you look at some of the list right now for best television shows of 2019, you're going to see a show on some of these lists that airs on HBO. The show is called Watchmen. Watchmen. It's been, again, voted as one of the best shows of 2019. Now, Watchmen is an American superhero drama. It's a television series that continues the 1987 DC comic series Watchmen. So Watchmen is a TV series, but it's based off a comic book from 1987 DC Comics. Now, I am not super familiar with the DC Comics. I am not. I think I may have read one or two. I cannot say that I'm super familiar with it. There was the Watchmen movie. I did not see that. So I am not super familiar with everything related to the Watchmen, and I'm not here to pretend that I'm an expert, and I'm not going to get into all the different things about the Watchmen characters or its kind of the world, the universe it has created, and everything about it. So I'm going to give some basic information, but for the hardcore Watchmen fans who may hear this, please don't, start criticizing because you're missing the point. The point is about something that happened or something that was shown in the first episode of the HBO series. Now, I need to say this right from the start. If you're not familiar with the Watchmen TV series airing on HBO, you definitely need to know this about its content. Its content is for a mature audience, definitely. Explicit language, sexual content, and nudity. So in no way, shape, or form am I trying to support things shown in the show. I'm not even promoting the show. But I have to bring up the show because the show is the source for the topic we're going to talk about, and you'll see why. I could talk about this topic and ignore the show, but that would really be disingenuous because I think the show has now brought this topic to the forefront of a lot of people's minds, and so I want to acknowledge the show in doing so. I'm not trying to acknowledge the show saying, hey, everyone should go watch it because it's filled with a lot of content that many people would find very objectionable and would not support in any way, shape, or form. But I still have to mention the show because the show has brought something from history into the present. And so I'm going to explain how the show did this, and then we're going to talk about about this subject and its Yeah, it's disturbing. All right, so let's get a little bit of information. All right, the show, The Watchmen, it takes place in 2019, and it's really set in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Now, when I first realized, when I read kind of a summary, a synopsis, that the show was set in Tulsa, Oklahoma, my mind did not connect it to a very, 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 very tragic, horrific event that happened in the past in Tulsa, Oklahoma. In fact, when I think of Tulsa, Oklahoma, I don't even think about this horrible, tragic event that occurred in American history. And to be fair, I wasn't even taught about this horrible event that occurred in American history in the public school system. They did not even mention it, and I was educated here in Texas, which is not that far from Oklahoma. In fact, I would think every student in America would want to be taught about this horrible event. So when I saw that the show is taking place in Tulsa, Oklahoma, this is, to be honest, again, I have no connection to the comic book or to the movie, so my understanding of this series is just from the series itself. I was like, well, that's a weird place to set a show, Tulsa, Oklahoma. Why there? All right, well, within about 5 minutes into the show, you know why Tulsa, Oklahoma, all right? So the show takes place in 2019, Tulsa, Oklahoma. A white supremacist group, the 7th Cavalry. Now, Cavalry is not spelled with a C, it's spelled with a K, Kavalry. The 7th Cavalry, who's inspired by some writings and a masked image, they wage war against minorities and the police that enforce special reparations for victims of racial injustice. All right, now, you've got a show borrowing from a lot of hot topics, right? You've got racism. You've got reparations. Wow, you've got a lot of topics that are very relevant into the culture that we currently live in. All right, okay, that's going to make it a hot topic show, a controversial show, because you deal with reparations, you're going to get people from all sides arguing for and against. And in this particular episode of the Socratic Circle podcast, we're not here to debate the reparations or the philosophy behind reparations. We're not to get into that, all right? But let's continue. More about the show. On Christmas Eve, 2016, this is in the show, during an event that came to be known as the White Night, the Cavalry attacked the homes of 40 Tulsa police officers. Of those who survived, only 2 stayed with the force, and then they named those characters, all right? As the police force was rebuilt, laws were passed that required police to not disclose their profession and to protect their identities while on the job by wearing masks, which includes allowing for costumed police officers. Now, this all sets up kind of the universe, the world in which the narrative and the story of the Watchmen unfold. You have these policemen. They all suffer this horrible attack. Now these policemen some wear costumes or just a mask. And that creates kind of the world. You've got racial tensions going on. You've got this white supremacist group. You've got the police, and you've got all of these tensions. You've got reparations now that are now a part of the society within this show. You've got all of these things going on, and it's very relevant to culture. Now, some people could see certain things that they do in the show and probably try to argue, well, that's just a political propaganda, or some may argue, well, they're just using these things to try to create controversy. And you can be someone who decided to write the show, wanted to write a show incorporating a lot of these ideas and themes and tell a story involving these hot topics, right? And I tend to look at it maybe not from such a cynical perspective, but allow art to tell a story, and it tells the story. And again, I'm not telling you to watch it. There's definitely content in it that I cannot in any way, shape, or form tell you should, but you may want to be at least aware of the show. It's on HBO. It's considered by many to be one of the best shows of 2019, and it's based off a comic book. So you should at least be aware of what's going on, All right. I mean, if your kids are talking about, hey, we're watching that show. Hey, we're watching that show based off a comic book called The Watchmen. You're like, okay, yeah, go watch that comic book show. I don't care. You may want to know what they're watching. All right. It's not the Avengers. All right. It's not Iron Man. It's not Thor. No, it's definitely an adult comic book story. All right. And so you need to know that. And comic books there's some comic books with some serious adult content. Sometimes parents aren't aware of that. Now, this gets us to what I want to talk about. Are you ready? Here we go. The show opens with this absolutely crazy scene. Now, I have not watched the whole series. I don't know if I'm going to watch the whole series. I just wanted to know a little bit about it because I heard this discussion about this show. I heard this discussion about how this show utilizes an event from history, and I wanted to at least see what it was about. So I don't know if I'm going to watch the rest, but I was very intrigued by it. And as soon as it started, and I was like, wait a minute, okay. It opens, are you ready? In 1921, there's a young boy watching kind of like a newsreel, I guess some may call it. Or to me, it looked like an old-time serial where you have the good guy and you have the bad guy. But the good guy and what he's watching is African-American. And he's, defeating the bad guys. Like, okay, this is interesting. And so as this little boy is watching, a woman is playing the piano. It's like a silent film that he's watching. She's playing the music, the piano for the silent film that he's watching, the silent newsreel. And you see the words on the screen, and he's watching it, and he seems all excited. And all of a sudden, as he's watching it, and you hear like an explosion. And then all of a sudden, mass panic occurs, chaos, everybody's running around. And what you realize is what you witness is ultimately this little boy is put inside this box in the back of a wagon to try to get out of this horrible situation that's going on, because what you see happening is a massacre. What you see occurring is African Americans being slaughtered, African Americans being killed. It looks like a massacre of whites coming in to kill African Americans, and the little boy is black, and his parents are trying to get him out of this, and they put him in in this wagon in a box, and he is on his way out. Bullet holes come through the box. He almost gets hit. He looks through one of the bullet holes, and he sees an airplane. And dropping out of the airplane is some kind of, you're like, what is that? And the place where his parents are in explodes because the plane dropped a bomb. And the building explodes. And then the next thing you know, the little boy wakes up in a field. And when he wakes up, all the adults around him are dead. It's a violent, tragic scene. Now, when I first saw it, my first reaction is, wow, that's insane. That's crazy. That's what world could that ever happen? Yeah, I literally, that thought flashed through my mind for a second. And then all of a sudden it hit me. Wait a minute. 1921 Tulsa. Okay, this is the historical event that people were referring to. This is it. The historical event they're referring to happens literally in the first 5 minutes of the first episode. And I was like, wait, this can't be real. Okay, they had to take a tragedy and go way over the top with it, right? I mean, really? So I started doing a little bit of research just to make sure I understood exactly what happened. And here's something, again, a lot of articles coming out are talking about the event, but they're doing so from and because of the Watchmen on HBO. Here is one paragraph of such an article. HBO's Watchmen opens in 1921 during the Tulsa Race Massacre, a deeply disturbing real stain on American history, where on May the 31st, 1921, a mob of white people attacked a black community. And I'm like, that's crazy. So just a mob of white people came into a black community and just started killing people? No way. So I started, I guess I wasn't shocked. I wasn't shocked that blacks were obviously killed by whites, because that is a part of American history. We could go into a lot of tragic things that I was far more familiar with, but I wasn't familiar with the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre. I wasn't familiar with it. I don't know why I wasn't, but I wasn't. Not to this extent. I knew something happened because, again, when I heard all of the reports that they borrow from that, the Watchmen episode 1 borrows from a historical event, I had some idea that something happened in Tulsa, but my knowledge of it it's hard for me to explain. It's like I knew something happened, but when I watched it on the screen, the way they reenacted it, it just felt like that was fiction. And there's no way that could correspond to reality. So I kept thinking, okay, something bad happened in Tulsa. I do know something bad happened in 1920 something, 1930. I think I may have even thought it was 1940. So it was kind of like, I know, but I didn't know. Then what I saw on screen, I'm like, well, that can't be exactly right. So I was like, I need more information. So what I'm going to do is play for you from, I think it's a university. I don't remember the name of the university. I took the audio from a video from a university where they explained what happened, the historical event. Again, and sometimes it's known as the Tulsa Race Riot of 1921 or the Tulsa Race Massacre. I think I would call it a massacre more than I would call it a riot. It's just crazy. I did find photos of the aftermath of the massacre and the riots. I was dumbfounded. I was in shock. And it seems that when they show in the Watchmen an airplane flying over basically dropping a bomb, that actually occurred. They brought in actual airplanes to bomb a black community, killing human beings. It is shocking. Here I'll play this and give you some information. Here, just listen carefully, and we'll talk about it in just a second.
This program is brought to you by Emory University.
Tulsa, the African-American community in Tulsa was relatively prosperous, well-educated. I mean, they had done everything that they were supposed to do in terms of the American dream. You work hard, you save your money, you go to school, you buy property. I mean, this is what they had done under horrific conditions. I mean, when you look at the context of what Black America looked like at the time, the fact that they were able to do this is one of the things that we herald in terms of when we talk about the immigrant story, right? But instead, this created such seething resentment in Tulsa that you had black doctors, black attorneys, black businessmen. I mean, in fact, this area of Tulsa was known as Black Wall Street, to give you some sense of how much it held in terms of value, in terms of esteem, in terms of worth. But that resentment in Tulsa was so intense, and that it was just waiting for a spark to just ignite it. That spark was a black messenger was delivering a message. You know, they had messengers back in the day, was delivering a message downtown. And he gets in the elevator, and there's a white woman in the elevator. I believe she was the elevator operator. And from the first floor through the third floor, I mean, the elevator may have bumped or something, and he hit her a little bit, but he didn't hit her. He just got a brush against her. She yelled, "Rape." Now, to understand what the charge of rape means when a white woman yells rape against a black man in this period, because part of understanding the violence that African Americans faced was to deal with the issue of what was called the sanctity of white womanhood. And that sanctity of white womanhood said that all white women had to be protected from black beast, so-called black beast. And when she yelled rape, now the charge was absolutely improbable from the first floor to the third floor. Improbable. But it was the spark. They couldn't wait because he was the son of a prominent black businessman. So the police hauled him down to the station. Well, the black elite came down to the station going, this is my son, this is my boy. My son wouldn't do this. What's his bail? Like, oh, uppity. How dare you come down here? How dare you? And because the African American community sensed that the sense of anger and violence was rising, it wasn't one or two that came down. There were several of them that came down. And like, oh, so what, are you going to storm the jail? They said, no, but we're here for justice. We're here for justice. And then the lynch mob began to form in Tulsa. It was like, oh, these are some uppity Negroes who need to be put back in their place. And the violence began. Black Tulsa was, the lynch mob rode in, but they also came in airplanes, dropping bombs on Tulsa, Black Tulsa. There are descriptions and depictions of African Americans being decapitated, being forced to kneel down and just having their heads severed. There are the pictures of the strafings, of the bombings, of the shootings. Nobody's quite sure what the death toll is. But when you look at the pictures, what you see is an area that had once been thriving. What we say is the American dream, absolutely leveled by the violence, by the lynch mobs, by the airplanes, by the bombs, leveled. Black Tulsa has never recovered. As the bombings are happening, as the violence is happening, as Tulsa is on fire, the governor of Oklahoma is like, whoa, maybe, we should. The feds are looking up going, this is not our issue. I bet you, wow. Nothing we can do here. And that is so indicative of the imbalance that has happened in terms of justice, in terms of rights, in terms of the protection of basic civil and human rights for African Americans in the United States.
The preceding program is copyrighted by Emory University. This program is brought to you by Emory.
There you have it. That account is horrific. I mean, it's straightforward murder and massacre of human beings, and they're being slaughtered and killed because of the color of their skin. And crazy. They reach a level, and they just try to put them back down. Horrific. I mean, it's shocking. It's shocking. And again, I was not taught about that event in public school. Whatever knowledge I do, and again, it's foggy trying to figure out what I knew and what I did not know, because again, you hear about the event and you're like, wait a minute, did I hear about the event because of the show? Did I know? And trying to even organize what I know. But the reason I want you to hear my own confusion of what I know and did not know is because I believe that is an example of how many white people, I'm white, if you cannot tell, I'm white, how many of us who are white, some of these horrific events in history, we just don't know about them. And what we have a tendency to do sometimes in America, especially among many whites, and we've got to be honest with ourselves, well, that happened way back then. That's just old news. Who cares? But we have to care. Our children need to know about these horrible events. They need to know, because unless you know the horrific events of history, then the future generations are doomed to repeat them. I should have been taught about this horrible event here in Texas. I should have known this. When I started hearing that Watchmen, I kept hearing all these reviews, the Watchmen TV show, it's amazing, it's amazing, it's amazing, it's amazing. And they borrow from an event that occurred in Tulsa. And then I'm like, okay. And then I'm like, wait, the show is set in Tulsa. That's weird. Wait, something happened. And wait, what happened? Wait. And then trying to put it all together and then go, wait, I did at some point in my life, I heard about this, I think. I'm shocked that there was even that much confusion. I should have just known this occurred. A community and an American town was bombed by airplanes. If you see the photographs of that community, it literally looks like a war zone. If you've seen some of the drone footage from parts of Syria, some of those cities, There's more things standing in some of the war-torn areas of Syria than there were standing in that section of Tulsa. There's nothing. Everything is just leveled. It looks like a war occurred. A war occurred, and nobody did anything. And you can say, well, we can't feel guilty for the past. I may not can feel. None of my family had anything to do with that. What happened in Tulsa, but I can feel horrible for what occurred because I'm a human being, and those were other human beings who were being slaughtered. I should be bothered by that, and then I should want to take that information and share it with anyone and everyone who I can have listen to what occurred. But we'll ask some important questions in a minute. There's been some. I don't know when this report comes to us. It comes to us from CBS. CBS did a story, and I think the video was posted recently, about they possibly have discovered some mass graves from this Tulsa race massacre. Again, I'm not even going to call it a riot. It's a massacre. And so I'm going to at least play this report so that you'll at least know that this is still, a lot of things are coming to light because of the Watchmen TV series. So that maybe something good can come from this. Maybe some light can be brought to this. All right, here we go. I'm going to play. This is a report from CBS News.
Scientists in Oklahoma are one step closer to finding possible evidence of mass graves linked to one of the worst incidents of racial violence in our country's history. Researchers in Tulsa used ground-penetrating radar to survey 3 sites. They found irregularities at 2 of those sites that could be consistent with large-scale burials. Omar Villafranca is in Tulsa. Omar, this could ultimately uncover a new chapter in American history that most people have never, ever heard of. Good morning to you.
You're right. Good morning. You're right. And not just black history. You're right. This is American history. This is the Greenwood neighborhood, also known as Black Wall Street. You had tailors, banks, grocery stores, tax services, all black-owned businesses. But in 1921, a white mob burned it to the ground, and as many as 300 black residents were killed. That's what's depicted there on the letter K. History had basically almost forgotten about this, but the city of Tulsa is digging up the past and trying to heal old wounds. This was all part of the Greenwood area.
Yes, the building sat where his parking lot was.
Photojournalist Kevin Ross says he's grateful that a tragic, little-known part of Tulsa history is now coming to light.
For decades, it was hush-hush. Even some of the survivors that I interviewed, they were quiet and telling, oh, and the white people did this. They were whispering in their own homes because they were brought up not talking about what happened.
It happened on these streets in 1921. Much of the Tulsa neighborhood of Greenwood was burned to the ground by a white mob. The group clashed with several armed black men who had gathered to protect a black shoeshiner who was unjustly accused of assaulting a white woman. After a shot was fired, violence broke out, and hundreds of black people were massacred. Ross's great-grandfather was forced to flee the city after his business was destroyed.
You had explosions, you had people running for their lives. It was just hell on earth.
The horror was brought to life in the premiere episode of HBO's new series, Watchmen. Witnesses reported seeing bodies put in mass graves, but local officials hid evidence of any crimes.
Along the fence line.
At a public forum Monday, scientists confirmed they discovered what appears to be an underground pit, roughly 30 by 25 feet, which they say is large enough to bury up to 100 bodies.
But I'm as confident as I can be in the results that this is a very good candidate for something associated with the massacre.
G.T. Bynum is Tulsa's mayor.
It's very powerful. It's the first time that we've had anyone say that from a technical standpoint in an open forum in a meeting like this or to us.
Scientists are now planning to do additional surveys that could lead to excavations.
We don't know what the preservation will be like. And even if the preservation is truly excellent, we don't know who we'll find in there.
How soon would you like to see excavation?
I would like to see excavation by the spring. You know, we waited this long. We know where they are. Let's go get them.
The city wants to continue scanning early next year. Now, to give you a little bit more perspective, 35 blocks were burned to the ground. One of the few things that survived that massacre was the basement of this church here. Everything you see above ground was built afterwards. And church leaders in this community say if remains are found, they want them relocated here to the Black Wall Street area, and they want to build a memorial. Tony?
Well, that'd be appropriate. Omar, thank you very much. This was deliberately kept out of textbooks for years. So what's happening now is a powerful reckoning with history.
An important piece of history that should not be forgotten.
Exactly. It's a stunning story. I only heard about it 10 years ago, and I was embarrassed that I'd never heard of it. Either of you?
I only heard about it last year.
It's funny. I spoke to a friend of mine a couple years ago had said, you all should really look into doing a piece on Black Wall Street, and because it is something that you don't necessarily hear a lot about.
Now, there you have it. It was kept deliberately out of textbooks. It was kept deliberately out of textbook. And again, if I ever heard of it, and I still think I've heard something about it at some point, ultimately, it was a show on HBO, The Watchmen, based off a comic book that is bringing attention to this. And now, hopefully, maybe they will find a mass grave. Those remains can be put in a memorial, and it should be placed back, and it should be placed in every textbook. And forget the public school. Your job as a parent is to inform your children of what happened, no matter what race they are. Inform them. But when you inform them, and this is what I want to transition to, there's some questions we have to ask ourselves. And I think this is, and I know this is controversial, but we have to deal with this. All right? We live in a culture that has a hard time with moral absolutes. When you say something is immoral, something is evil, something is wrong, something is sinful, we have a culture who says, no. You believe it's sinful. You believe it's immoral because morality, wrong and right, is somewhat relative, right? I believe it's wrong, but you don't believe it's wrong. So, we're not going to say anything is definitively wrong. We live in a culture that has really embraced the philosophy of moral relativism. And when you embrace a philosophy of moral relativism, then a very important question has to be asked. What makes racism wrong? What makes it wrong? What is the basis? Now, some would argue that in the past, one of the arguments, if you read the Tarzan books, the famous Tarzan books, if you read those books, you will find a racist mindset. And that book promoted primarily almost from the basis of evolution that the blacks were closer to apes, not fully evolved as white people. So they are basically so one of the reasons for keeping them subservient and treating them almost like beasts or treating them like animals, you heard in the clip I played from Emory University, the black beast, that is very much an evolutionary argument. Well, if we're just animals, well, did some evolve higher than others? And if we evolved higher than another race, then are we superior to them? What is your argument against that morally? Now, I believe, obviously, from a Christian theological perspective, that we were all created in the image of God. All races are created in the image of God. All human life is sacred. All human life. All human beings are sinful. All human beings can be redeemed by the blood of Christ. And that all life has value. No matter what race or gender they are, there is value there. But sometimes when the culture deals with these issues, it's like, well, what makes it wrong? If I'm an animal, you're an animal, and we're just evolved animals, what literally makes it wrong? How do you say racism wrong? Now, you could argue murder is wrong because we have laws that are against it. But why are there laws against murder? Are those laws based off some transcendent value in human life? Could those laws be changed and say that murder is legal? Would that make it morally right? In other words, you have laws that says something is wrong or right, but then you have morality, which says it doesn't matter what the law says, there is still right and wrong. Does it make sense? In other words, if a law came about and said it's perfectly okay to kill people of a specific race, you can kill them, we're going to pass laws that take away their rights, and we're going to treat them not as equals. There were times there were laws just like that. Were those laws immoral? In other words, if you're going to get your morality from a law, then your morality can change when the law changes. Or is there a morality that transcends law? These are philosophical questions that the culture doesn't want to deal with. Hey, don't be racist. Racism is bad. Okay, why? What makes it bad? Are we created by God? Are we created in the image of God, all human beings, and therefore all human life is sacred? Well, no, I don't believe that we were created by God. I believe in evolution. So I'm just an evolved animal, but I'm not supposed to be racist because of why? In other words, this person over here is full-blown racist and a member of the KKK. This person over here, I'm just pointing to an empty room. So this person over here, they believe that racism is wrong. Okay, what's the basis of their moral argument? Is it their own personal worldview, their own personal agenda? Can you say that one is right and one is wrong? When a culture throws out wrong and right, transcendent wrong and right, and transcendent morality, then you have major issues. So when you deal with the subject of racism and you deal with the subject of a race massacre where people were slaughtered and killed in the United States of America, when you deal with a race of people were rounded up and put in internment camps during World War II, Japanese citizens of the United States of America, when you talk about these things, you can speak about how horrible they were, but what's your basis for passing a moral judgment upon it? It's like we live in a culture like, you cannot judge, and then they turn around and make a moral judgment about everything. Well, what's the basis of the morality? Whose morality are you utilizing to judge said behavior? I've stated it so many times, and I don't want to repeat it necessarily in any in-depth manner here, but morality only has a couple of sources, right? Morality is determined by the majority. Well, if morality is determined by the majority of people, then it was moral at one time in the United States of America to enslave human beings, purchase them as property, okay, possibly beat them, and do all kinds of other horrible things, because that was the agreed upon law by the majority. It was the majority at one time who agreed that African Americans should not have the same rights. They cannot use the same door, sit in the same seat, all these different rules, right? All the Jim Crow laws, right? So were they immoral? Well, if you say morality comes from the majority, then you cannot say it was immoral at that time. If you say, no, morality does not come from the majority, it comes from the minority. The minority of people get to determine morality. Well, right now we have a minority of people who belong to the KKK. Do they get to determine morality for the rest of us? Well, you would say no. So the majority, it doesn't work. The minority doesn't work. Well, then what's your third option? The individual gets to determine right and wrong. Well, if the individual gets to determine right and wrong, you can't tell the individual racist that they're wrong. So where does morality derive from? The majority, the minority, or the individual? Or do we look for a morality that is transcendent and outside of ourselves? Now it becomes a theological issue. And yes, that is complicated in how to make it work in society. But we have a society that is moving away from any idea, or moving away from being influenced by a transcendent morality. And now we have moral things being trying to figure it out inside. Now, to be fair, 1921, there would have been a lot. Who knows how many of those people? Hopefully very few. But how many of those people involved in that massacre were good, faithful church attenders, church attendees, church members? Hopefully, very few. But tragically, that can occur because some people can try to take their racism and blend it with their religion, and then you get an argument that their religion justifies their racism, which Christianity does have that in its history as well, especially in the South. And we won't get into all of that. But whenever you deal with these issues, you're dealing with the issue that yes, the racism is wrong. Well, first we have got to acknowledge the history. Right? That's number one. We got to acknowledge the history. Number two, we have to say that racism is wrong. absolutely wrong, horrific, horrendous, and it needs to be eradicated from the face of the planet. It never will, which comes to why it will never be eradicated. That's because the human heart is wicked and depraved. Again, that's a theological perspective. But at some point, you have to ask yourself tough questions about why something is right, why something is wrong, where morality comes from. Does human life have any intrinsic value? Am I just an animal, or am I created in the image of God? And God says if you take the life of a person, then your life should be taken. The idea of capital punishment is established early in Genesis, and then it goes all the way over into the New Testament. In the New Testament, though, the individual does not carry out the punishment. The government is to carry out the punishment. They do not wield the sword in vain, if we want to get into a biblical discussion. But I think that those are questions we have to ask deeper questions. Look, racism is wrong. Yes. Here's the history. Oh my goodness, it's horrible. Let's admit it. Let's never allow this to happen again. But we need some kind of deeper understanding of right and wrong and what gives life value. I mean, that's a big argument in our culture right now. And think about how this works. There was an argument at one time that the Jews were not truly people. They were less than. And that was used to massacre them. We got a rise of anti-Semitism happening here in the United States of America right now, especially in the New York area with the stabbings that occurred. Anti-Semitism. That's a racist idea. And in many cases, it views Jews as less valuable. So that argument was used against Jews to help eradicate and try to exterminate them from the face of the planet. Saying that blacks were not fully human, that were basically beasts or animals, that was used to enslave those from the African continent and to make them slaves. That same mindset was used to take and kill Native Americans, to take their land and to enslave them. They were not truly fully developed. They were almost animals. You dehumanize a group of people, then you justify horrible acts committed against them. That's how it's always worked. Some make the same argument, and again, this is very controversial, for a baby in the womb. It's not really a baby. 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 So we can kill it. We can kill it. And we can celebrate well, we're not killing anything because there's nothing really there. And we can almost celebrate that, hey, abortion is wonderful. Well, slow down. What if you're wrong? Because people were obviously wrong about Jews not being fully human. Obviously, they were wrong that Africans were not fully human. And clearly, they were wrong about Native Americans not being fully human. So our history of mankind has been the group that we dehumanize, and that we then slaughter, kill, and do horrific things. We later admit that it was wrong. I wonder if there'll come a time that we'll realize that we've committed a mass Holocaust against babies in the womb. Don't know, but it's the same mindset. It's a philosophical argument about the value of human life. What is a human? Right? How does your view of evolution come into play with this? Where does morality come from? There are deeper questions, and sometimes when we deal with racial issues in the news, we don't get to those deeper issues. All right, now Watchmen does bring up the issue of reparations, and we could get into a whole discussion about reparations, but we won't discuss that here. I just wanted to bring this to everyone's attention so that you, at least if you hear someone talk about the Watchmen show, you know what occurred in the first 5 minutes of the first episode of the first season. Obviously, there's going to be another season, and the show right now is getting all kinds of critical love. And so you're informed about what's happening in your world, but you are also informed about what happened in the history of the United States of America. And for those who are listening to me outside of the United States of America, yes, we have a horrible history of horrific things being done to African Americans, to those, to people of who are part of a minority racially, who were treated horrifically. Their rights were taken from them. They were not treated as human beings, and it's a horrific. I don't even know how to say it. It's a horrific part of American history that cannot be denied. And sadly, I mean, all those reporters, they had never heard of the event. And I'm sitting here when I started hearing about this, I started thinking, do I know this? Do I not know this? I definitely know I wasn't taught it in the public school system. All right, I'll stop right there. You can email me at newsif@yahoo.com, newsif@yahoo.com, newsif@yahoo.com. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Socratic Circle podcast. You've got something to think about. God bless.